They say the scariest stories aren't found in books, but in the quiet confessions of those who survived something they were never meant to find. Tonight, we descend into the forgotten world of cursed campgrounds, abandoned ranger stations, and backwoods trails that lead nowhere and don't always let you return. These are original horror tales, crafted in the spirit of Reddit-style campground terror. Not copied, not borrowed, but born from the same chilling thought. What if it really happened? So settle in, listen closely, and if you see shadows moving just beyond the trail, whatever you do, don't follow them. Welcome to Whispers After Dark, where shadows talk and the night listens. Subscribe, like, and comment. Don't forget to hit the notification button so you won't miss an episode. Now let's get on with our stories. They say some campgrounds were never meant to be reopened, not because of wildlife or weather, but because of what still walks there when the sun goes down. You won't find their names on modern maps, but the locals remember. Places where children's laughter isn't playful, it's bait. Where something with small hands and pitch-black eyes waits just beyond the light of your fire. Our first story is about the black-eyed children of Whistler's Bend. The campground was abandoned, long shut down, left to rot where the trees reclaimed it. A weathered wooden sign still stood near the old entrance road, Whistler Bend Campground, closed. Beyond it, gravel crumbled into weeds, and crooked fire rings rusted beneath layers of pine needles. A young woman named Allie had been her life dream for nearly 6 months, traveling solo in a small, older model motorhome with her dog, Nelson. She wanted to see the world, experience life. She had no family ties, so she sold everything she had, bought her home on wheels, and hit the road. She had seen an old poster for the Whistler Bend Campground at a small diner. It looked perfect. It said it offered quiet, secluded campsites, showers, a small lake, and a place to do laundry. That first night, she pulled in late, just before dusk. The only sounds were the wind through the trees and the crunch of her tires over broken gravel. The campground was abandoned. There was an old ranger cabin nearby, half collapsed. The windows were busted out, the front steps tilting away from the door like the forest itself wanted to drag it under. Nearby, the remains of public toilets sat sunken and overtaken by moss and mildew. But Allie wasn't bothered. It just meant she would save money on camping fees. The water faucet still worked, so she filled up her water tank, took a shower, and made dinner. Afterwards, she lit a small fire, fed Nelson, and turned in early. The forest was still. The air was crisp. She slept soundly. Next morning, she explored the small campground, washed clothes in a bucket. As twilight deepened, Allie sat near the fire with Nelson lying beside her, head on his paws. The campground was deathly quiet. No owls, no crickets, just the sound of the fire popping. And then, whispers. Not voices from afar, not animals, but children's whispers. Soft, careful. Like secrets being passed between invisible mouths just beyond the tree line. Nelson perked up, ears forward, a low growl building in his throat. Allie turned her head toward the woods, but saw nothing. The whispers stopped. She stared into the dark a little longer before putting the fire out early and locking the motorhome tight. Inside, Nelson wouldn't rest until the lantern was on. They didn't hear the whispers again that night, but the silence felt heavier. It was almost completely dark on the third night when the first knock came. Gentle, deliberate, right at the side door of the camper. Allie stood still, listening. Then she pulled the curtain back just a few inches. 2 children stood outside, a boy and a girl, pale, motionless, heads slightly tilted forward. Their clothing was wrong, old-fashioned, like something from a thrift store no one had been in for decades, and their eyes pitch black, solid, shiny, empty. They spoke in unison. "Can we come in?" Allie backed away from the window. Nelson began to growl again, low and dangerous. Suddenly, banging erupted from all sides of the motorhome, fists pounding the metal, nails dragging along the side panels. Taps at the windows, slow and rhythmic. For hours it came and went. Laughter, knocking, whispers. At one point, the children called out to the dog, in that same flat, mechanical voice. She scrambled into the driver's seat and tried to start the engine. The engine turned, then died, again and again. No signal on her phone, no way to call for help. She stayed on the floor with Nelson beside her all night, holding her breath with each knock, each laughter. Finally, sunrise came. The knocking stopped. The woods grew still again. This time when she turned the key, the engine started, on the very first try. She left the motor running and quickly packed the few items outside. A short time later, Allie pulled into a weathered old gas station a few miles past the turnoff to the campground. The kind with a bell that rang when you drove over the hose, and one old man who came out to pump the gas. He didn't say much until he rounded the side of the motorhome. Then he paused. "You camp out at Whistler Bend?" he asked. Allie nodded slowly. "Place is abandoned for a reason. You're lucky you made it out at all." He pointed to the side of the camper. Pressed into the dust, clear as day, tiny handprints, dozens of them, all around the door, too small to belong to anyone else, too many to forget. His next words sent a chill down her spine. "Next time you want to find a quiet place to camp, remember some campgrounds were closed for a reason. Some trails should have never been cleared. And some visitors, well, they don't knock just to be let in." Allie quietly handed him the money for the gas. In her rearview mirror, she swore she saw two children wave, clothing old and ragged and eyes too dark to forget. Most campgrounds have rules, posted signs warning you not to leave the trail, not to approach wildlife, not to light fires out of season. Black Hollow Campground warned you about something else. The rule wasn't in the ranger packet or printed on the map. It was painted on an old sign at the entrance, weathered, barely readable. This is the story of Do Not Speak to the Shadows. The first sign read, "Do not feed the wildlife," put there to discourage campers from interacting with the wildlife. It was posted at the park entrance. Painted in white block letters, it was a bit weathered and nailed to a wooden post. The second sign didn't make sense. Ranger Matt noticed it on his second day at Black Hollow. It was old and nailed to a twisted pine tree just past the entrance. If you weren't looking, you would miss it. It was worn, weathered, and a bit crooked. The sign was hand-painted on a rotted piece of board. It read, "Do not speak to the shadows." The message was odd, unsettling. The paint had long since chipped, and something dark stained the edges of the wood. He asked the site manager about it, just in passing. The man looked at him, paused mid-sentence, and said, "Just leave it alone," and walked away. Matt had worked parks across 3 states. He'd seen weird carvings, backwoods superstitions, even a guy who swore a tree had tried to eat his backpack. But nothing ever felt like this. There was something about Black Hollow. The light didn't fall right. Paths curved when you weren't paying attention. Sometimes hikers swore they were being watched, though there had been no sightings of bears or cougars, nothing big enough to stalk a grown adult. Then a child went missing. Her name was Emily, 6 years old, last seen by the restrooms near the visitor center. Her mother swore she'd only looked away for a second. When Matt pulled the surveillance footage, he expected a blurred image, maybe a van, something explainable. But what he saw chilled him. At 2:46 p.m., Emily stood near the vending machine, holding a granola bar. At 2:47, she turned toward the tree line, toward nothing. Then, she smiled, as if someone was talking to her. She took 3 steps forward and vanished. No one else in frame. No glitch. One moment she was there, the next, gone, vanished. The night after the search for Emily was finally called off, Matt stayed after hours. He sat on the porch of the ranger station and stared into the woods, trying to make sense of it. The breeze was still, moonless. The woods darker than they had any right to be. Then he saw it. Movement. Not branches swaying, not animals rustling, but something stepping between the trees. No detail, just the suggestion of a shape, taller than a man, hunched forward, long arms that didn't swing when it moved. Matt stood, flashlight in hand, but didn't dare shine it into the woods. The shape paused at the edge, just where the light from the porch ended. Then it raised a hand, not in greeting, not in threat, just lifted, as if acknowledging him, then it was gone. A week later, it happened again. This time a hiker. He was found 5 days later, shaking, incoherent, mumbling about a shadow man. Matt reported it, told his supervisor they needed to close the trails, issue a warning, do something. The man just shook his head. You think this hasn't happened before? 2 hikers and a kid went missing last season. People wander off the trail. Sometimes we find them, most of the time we don't. He reached into the bottom drawer and handed Matt a thick, faded file. That night, Matt flipped through it. Most of it was dull. Maintenance logs, weather reports. But near the back was a bundle labeled Missing Persons, 1962-1992. The folder was full of reports. Missing hikers, unexplained disappearances. There were pages and pages dating back years. Tucked in the very back was a yellowed sheet of paper, a child's drawing. Tall black shapes stretched from the treetops to the ground. A small stick figure stood in front of them. At the top, written in shaky pencil, "Don't talk to them, don't speak to the shadows." Matt didn't sleep that night. The forest felt different the next day. No squirrels, no birds, not even wind, just silence, as if the trees were holding their breath, watching. At dusk, he checked the dumpsters behind the visitor center. That's when he saw the boy, alone, maybe 5 years old, standing at the tree line, staring at something unseen. Matt called out. No response. The boy just tilted his head, listening. Matt sprinted across the clearing. When he reached him, the boy turned and whispered, "It wanted me to go play. I want my mommy." No one else was around. Matt scooped him up and carried him to the ranger office. He sat the boy in a chair and grabbed the file. There it was, his photo. The boy who went missing last year. Same clothes, same shoes. Matt picked up the phone. Later, the boy was bathed, fed, and tucked into the cot in the corner of the office. Matt didn't sleep. He stayed at the station, eyes fixed on the tree line. Just before sunrise, he saw it. It didn't walk. It floated. Tall and crooked, like a coat left hanging too long. Its limbs bent wrong like a puppet with broken strings. It wasn't black. It was darker, swallowing the light around it. No face, no eyes, just a slow, tilting head. And when it paused, the nearby shadows leaned toward it, as if they belonged to it. The boy's parents arrived that afternoon, pale, shaking. He'd vanished during a family camping trip over a year ago. Search teams, posters, vigils, and nothing, until now. "He looks the same," his mother whispered. "Exactly the same. He hasn't aged." The boy didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared out the window, eyes fixed on the woods as they drove away. Matt watched until the taillights were gone. He never saw the boy again. But sometimes when the sun sets behind Black Hollow, he still hears something whispering just beyond the trees, waiting for someone else to answer back. But the signs are still there, and sometimes just before nightfall, hikers hear whispers in the trees, not words, just the cadence of a voice that isn't quite human. So if you ever find yourself walking alone in Black Hollow Campground, do not stray off trail, do not linger by the trees. And whatever you do, do not speak to the shadows. The old fire tower was shut down years ago, left to rot on forgotten ridgelines, empty and silent. But some still stand, and some aren't as empty as they seem. Our next story is about the Wendigo of Wren's Peak. Ranger Dana wasn't supposed to be assigned to Wren's Peak. The tower had been decommissioned for over a decade, too remote, too unstable, swallowed by trees and fog. But after a string of dry lightning strikes, a distorted radio transmission crackled through HQ. Wren's Peak needs a body, just for the weekend. High fire risk. They said she would have to go alone, with funding tight. There weren't enough personnel to send 2 rangers. Dana took a backpack, a blanket, and an old radio that barely held a signal. She double-checked the weather updates and found no storm warnings. Regardless, she headed out on an aged four-wheeler. She reached the tower before dusk. It loomed like a skeleton against the darkening sky, the stairs warped and slick from years of rain. But the door still latched, the windows still opened. Inside, the world below vanished into fog. The first day passed quietly. The forest was unnaturally still, no birds, no wind, just the creak of old beams and the hiss of silence. The second night, the storm struck. It didn't roll in, it dropped. Lightning split the sky. Rain hammered the glass. Wind screamed through the trees so loud she thought the tower would snap in two. And then came the knocking. 3 dull thuds from beneath the trapdoor. Dana froze. Another knock. Then a voice, soft, familiar, wrong, muffled, like it was speaking through wet cloth. "Let me in, Dana," it whispered. "It's cold, please." It was her sister's voice, her sister who died 3 winters ago. Dana staggered back, grabbed the radio, and pressed the call button with shaking hands. "This is Ranger Dana at Wren's Peak. Someone's here. I need assistance. Someone's outside the tower." Static. Then finally a voice, distant and slow. "Ranger Dana, that tower was shut down 10 years ago. There's no storm on the radar." The line went dead. She didn't sleep. Sat in the corner with the axe beside her, listening. The knocking never came again, but the silence that followed was worse. Heavy. Watching. At sunrise, she saw something in the trees. Far below, just inside the edge of the clearing, a figure. Too tall, too thin. Covered in something like torn hide and patches of matted fur. Its limbs were too long, bent the wrong way at the knees. Its mouth stretched wide and hollow, and antlers jutted from its skull like broken branches. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there, looking up. She closed the shutters and backed away. That afternoon she found a note written in an old notebook in the desk, folded, torn, yellow with age. The writing was smeared and nearly illegible, but one line stood out. "Don't open the hatch. If it talks like someone you love, it's already wearing their face." The Wendigo. She'd heard whispers of it, an old tale rangers passed around half joking, half serious. A spirit of hunger, a mimic, a hunter. It wore the voices of those you'd trust. It called to you in familiar tones, and it never knocked more than 3 times. She stayed inside for 2 more nights, ate the last of her rations. Her boots stayed laced, her axe never left her side. The storm never ended. On the 7th night her radio crackled again. This time, no voice, just breathing. The locked handle on the door hatch shook, slow, deliberate, then silence. She stayed awake the rest of the night, in the corner on the small bed, whispering into the radio for help that never answered. But the next morning, something had changed. The storm had stopped, but Forrest looked deeper. The trees seemed closer. The trail down the mountain was gone. Her four-wheeler completely vanished. On the 7th night, her radio crackled again. Again, no voice, just breathing, low and close. Then just after midnight, she heard the footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, then silence at the hatch. She climbed onto the roof to try to get a radio signal. That's when she saw it again. The Wendigo, standing just outside the tree line. It pointed its clawed finger at her, then at the trail. One that had not been there the day before. Then it turned and walked back into the trees. After a few moments, she slowly opened the latch. The old four-wheeler sat facing the trail. She grabbed her backpack and ran. A week later, when they finally sent a team to find her, the tower was empty. Her pack was gone. Her gear was gone. Only one thing remained. Her ranger jacket, draped neatly at the base of the stairs, arms folded over themselves like someone had placed it there with care. The name tag still attached. Occasionally, someone wanders too close to Wren's Peak. They say they hear footsteps overhead, a woman's scream, and then silence. Deep in the woods, something waits, watches, and in a small town far away, a woman cooks dinner for her husband and child. At night, she dreams of that week of terror on fire watch, and when she cries out, her husband pulls her close, holds her until the trembling stops. But even in sleep, her eyes never face the window. Some cabins were never meant to be rented. They don't show up on websites or booking apps. Their numbers are crooked. Their windows stick. The doors swell shut when it rains. Rangers don't talk about them because officially they don't exist. And the people who stay in them don't always leave the same. Our next story is Terror at Cabin 13. They weren't the kind of couple that scared easy. Jake and Mara were both in their 30s, used to long hours and high stress in the city. So when the letter arrived, offering a free 4-day stay at a small mountain campground, they didn't hesitate. They called the number, booked the weekend, and packed up to decompress. No phones, no emails, no work, just peace. The letter had promised a quaint, secluded cabin nestled deep in the trees, far from the noise of real life. The place was called Cold Hollow Ridge, a primitive campground with cabins spaced far apart along a narrow gravel road. The air smelled like pine and moss. The sign at the ranger station was so faded you could barely make out the word, "Welcome." No one else was there when they arrived, but tacked to the door was a faded envelope with their name on it. Inside was the key to cabin 13 and a small map with the cabin number circled in red. The cabin was exactly what they'd hoped for, rustic but clean. A wood-burning stove, a small kitchen, 2 rocking chairs and a porch swing on a creaky front porch. No Wi-Fi, just trees and silence. That night they settled down with a glass of wine on the porch. Mara curled up next to Jake with a blanket on the porch swing. They talked about nothing, laughed, stared at the stars. But sometime after midnight, Mara nudged Jake. "Do you smell that?" It was faint, a smell of burnt wood, cloth, and oil. Then came a low cry. At first Jake thought it was an animal, soft, barely audible, coming from the trees close to the cabin. They listened. There was something almost human about it. Then quiet, just the wind again. The next night, they built a fire in the pit out back. Jake grilled steaks while Mara made a salad. They were eating dinner when it started again. Voices. This time it was closer. Still low, whispering. 2 voices, one male, one female. But it wasn't a conversation. It was chanting. Slow, rhythmic, and wrong. Like something just beyond the tree line repeating the same phrase again and again. No one leaves, no one leaves, no one leaves. The words were barely louder than the wind, but each repetition pressed in harder, like the forest itself was trying to make them believe it. Jake stood up with the flashlight. "Hey, we're camping here," he shouted. Nothing, just the beam of the flashlight bouncing off trees. Mara reached for her phone to call the ranger's station. After several rings, she heard someone answer. Silence, then a dial tone. The voices got louder, closer, and then the voice seemed to fade into the woods. That night, while they were lying in bed, they heard scratching at the back window. Jake thought it might be a raccoon. But there were no prints in the morning, just 3 long scratches on the glass. Mara wanted to pack up and leave then, but Jake talked her into staying one more night. They'd barely finished dinner when the power cut out. The entire cabin went dark. Jake went to check the fuse box on the side of the cabin, but the switches hadn't tripped. He flipped them anyway. Nothing happened. He went back inside and Mara lit the lantern. The moment she turned it on, she smelled the smoke again. Thicker than before, but still elusive. A few moments later came the footsteps. Heavy, slow, circling the cabin, leaves crunching, twigs snapping. Jake grabbed the fireplace poker and stood near the front door. Something knocked. 3 sharp raps against the back wall. Silence. Then a whisper. Right outside the front door. Open the door. The voice was wrong. Flat, no emotion, like it was trying to sound human, but didn't quite get the tone right. What sounded like claws raked down the door. Another knock. Louder this time, on the side of the cabin. Then again at the back. The lantern flickered. "Let us in," Mara whispered. "Jake, what is that?" But he didn't answer. He was staring at the front door, frozen. The doorknob began to shake, violently. Whatever was tormenting them pounded hard against the door and then screamed. Not a human scream. Something high-pitched and broken. A sound like pain, frustration, and hunger tangled together. It circled the cabin, again and again screaming, knocking, whispering, and scratching. And then suddenly, at dawn, it stopped. Complete silence. They grabbed their bags and left everything else behind. Neither of them spoke until they were miles down the mountain road. Later that day, Jake called the campground to report what had happened. A different ranger answered the phone. "You must be mistaken," the man said. "The campground doesn't open until next week. And there's no cabin 13. That one burned down 5 years ago, a week before opening." Jake stared at the phone. The key still sat in the glove box. Under it, the letter they'd received in the mail, and burned into the surface of an old wooden keychain, just 2 words, Cabin 13. They tell you not to touch the dial. Channel 9 isn't part of the training. It isn't listed in the manual, but every ranger hears about it eventually. A ghost frequency. A signal that bleeds through static late at night, whispering names, coordinates, or sometimes just breathing. No one's supposed to use it. No one's supposed to even hear it. But once you do, it doesn't stop calling. This is the story of static on Channel 9. Ranger Mason didn't know Channel 9 existed until it called him by name. He was on his 3rd solo patrol through the north boundary of Black Hollow. 3 days of quiet trail maintenance, overnight gear checks, and long, uneventful hours in the deep woods. Nothing ever really happened out there. But the locals still told stories. There was one they all knew, the old cabin out past Ridge 12, sometimes called the Echo Shack. Supposedly built before the park was officially designated, it had been used as a ranger outpost sometime in the late 1960s. There were rumors of a search team going missing out there. Some said they were caught in a blizzard. Others claimed one of them went mad, locked the others inside, and vanished. After that, the land around it was declared unstable. No one rebuilt. Most of the newer rangers never found it, or didn't bother looking. The trails leading there had long since vanished. Mason didn't believe the stories. He'd asked about it once during orientation and was told bluntly, "If there ever was a station out there, it doesn't exist anymore. Stay inside the boundary." He never thought about it again, until the signal. It was just past 2 a.m. when his radio popped to life with a hiss of static. Then, clearly, like it was right beside him, a voice broke through the hum. "Son, Mason, 41.835, 112.274, please help me." The voice was breathless and cracked, a message looped and broken, caught in a signal not meant to exist. Channel 9. There was no Channel 9. It wasn't one of the standard channels, not listed in the manual, but the older rangers had mentioned it, half joking, stories about voices breaking through the static, calling names, repeating old distress signals. The same message over and over again. Most rangers just turned the dial and moved on, but the message had said his name. He checked his map. The coordinates landed him past the boundary line. Deep forest, unmapped. Park administration had labeled that section non-navigable, steep terrain, landslides, no viable shelter. And yet the signal had come from there, strong, local. He tried to radio base. No response. Switch back to 9. "Please, help me. I can't get out." That voice again. Then silence. Against his better judgment, Mason packed up his light gear and followed the coordinates. The fog came in quickly, thick and unnaturally low. His flashlight cut through barely 20 feet ahead. After nearly an hour, he found the trail. Not marked, not cleared, but real. It felt wrong, like walking through someone else's memory. The trees arched too perfectly. The quiet was too complete. Then he saw it, a building. The old cabin stood just ahead, swallowed in moss and shadow. The roof sagged. One side had partially collapsed under a rotten beam, but the structure was unmistakable. Old Ranger style, steel frame antenna, heavy door still bolted in place. It shouldn't have been there. He climbed the 3 steps, each one groaning under his boots. The door bore long, deep gouges across the surface, not from weather or time, from claws. Something strong. He paused, hand on the knob. His His radio crackled again. "Inside, please." He opened the door. The air inside was thick and stale, like something had died and never rotted. The dust was heavy, but the floor was disturbed, as if someone had been pacing in tight circles. The ceiling joists above him creaked faintly. Gouges streaked across the inside walls. A desk had been pushed into the corner, splintered in half. He panned his flashlight toward the far side of the room and froze. A message had been smeared across the back wall in something dark and drying. Mason, scrawled in uneven lines, still wet, still dripping. The air vibrated suddenly like a low electrical hum had filled the room. His radio screeched. He dropped it. Overhead, something moved, a dragging sound. Deliberate steps pacing the attic floorboards above him. Then a knock. From inside the walls, he bolted. The woods swallowed him fast. The fog was thicker now, the trail narrower. It felt like the forest was shifting, stretching out around him. Behind him, faint but clear through the static, the voice returned. Only this time, it was his own. "Please help me. 41.835. I'm stuck." When Mason returned to the perimeter station just before dawn, the clock on the wall read 2:08 a.m., 3 minutes before he'd left. His boots were soaked, his radio was fried, his GPS said he'd never moved more than 60 feet. He filed no report. Weeks later, a different ranger on night patrol tuned through the channels out of boredom and paused when she heard something familiar. Her own name and coordinates, 41.835. They say Channel 9 isn't real, that it's a glitch, a signal fragment from a long-dead tower. But sometimes it answers back. And if you hear your name coming through the static, don't follow it, because what's calling you already knows how it ends. Campgrounds have rules for a reason, but not all of them are written down. Voices in the woods, vanished hikers, shadows that whisper your name. Just stories, right? Or are they? What do you believe? Truth or legend? Sometimes they are often hard to separate, because every story begins somewhere with something. Every myth has a beginning. Every whispered tale is born from something. But these stories were created from my own imagination. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Whispers After Dark, Disturbing Stories to Sleep By. Leave us a comment below and check out the other chilling tales in our channel. Make sure to subscribe, like, and tap the notification bell so you never miss what waits in the shadows. Until then, stay curious, stay cautious, and beware of the whispers after dark. Our story time is over, and for now, let the storm and the sounds of the rain keep you company. And may the whispers lull you into a deep, dreamless sleep. Good night, dear friends, and join me next week for a new episode.